Hello, everyone. Welcome to YouTube Masterclass. This is a program from Coursera, and it's used for the colleges, the universities, and institutions. University of Southern California, California Institute of the Arts, and there's also a program now that I've started at Harvard. It's a film and media degree, or aesthetics and philosophy degree, or comparative lit, which are all kind of the same. My degree at Harvard was the aesthetics and philosophy degree, PhD. And you can see that on the internet that fact that Harvard gave me a PhD for aesthetics and philosophy. So I figure these classes that are film studies at Harvard can fit into the aesthetic and philosophy program, and you wouldn't have to technically call it a film school, but that these other classes, USC and Calarts, are using this for a film school class, or basically they are film schools. They're one, like USC has other programs too, but they're film schools. Even if you're in the other program, you're going to work with one of these movie makers that's like at USC. So it's like film school and film school, and then Harvard doesn't have a film school, but now it kind of does because there's an aesthetics and philosophy. Now, aesthetics and philosophy is what we do anyway in this film class because it's an auteur study, and an auteur study is like an author study, and we know that in film, that means the director pretty much, there's very few instances where the director wasn't the sole auteur of the film, except if it's a craftsman film. And craftsman can be made in two ways. It can be classical or realist. But I think we get the point on all of that. That what I'm saying is that Quentin Tarantino, as far as an academic subject, has to ring true to the authorial code, that his version of the director is the one that's in control. That throughout his career, even with some bumps in the road with who were his producers, he was still able to come out the other side with these gigantic super visions of godlike proportions. And we say that because the gunshots are loud, the cussing's loud, the car crashes are loud, and I'm just getting the Reservoir Dogs in the opening 5 minutes. And so we've got this whole explosion, like Orson Welles' explosion, with just these few films that have changed the world. And they've become so much bigger than even they are, and they've become these entities in and of themselves. And these pop cultural mediums that get the ideas from Tarantino never ceases to amazing that he still originates other ideas, and that he's the originator of ideas, but still in control of the movie is beyond Orson Welles. I mean, if you're the originator of the idea for a movie, you may never even get noticed, really. So, but that Tarantino starts from that and ends as his result that everybody in the world sees it before they, before they can't. And then, everybody's heard about it anyway. Like for the 5 people on Earth that haven't seen Pulp Fiction, those probably got told the most what it was about. And that's not why they didn't go see it. They're just like Jesuit monks and they stay out of theaters. No, I'm kidding. Jesuit monks are actually really good in theaters because Dr. Casper at University of Southern California was a Jesuit monk before he joined the Legion of Decency. And then he met Betty Davis, and he's one of the backup dancers in the remake of Singing in the Rain, all that jazz. And I was just thinking about Singing in the Rain because Singing in the Rain is one of the only movies I know of that's not nihilistic apocalypse that belongs on a top 10. And I'm not saying, like, as filmmakers, we all lean towards nihilist apocalypse, which just means, like, belief in nothing, into the world type stuff. Or, like, they don't believe any action had any point. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. I've seen nihilist films that weren't that great. And I think it's funny in The Big Lebowski, the nihilists are kind of like antagonists, only kind of, though. And it's like, with the nihilism that they're mentioning in Big Lebowski, it's like where you don't believe in anything. And that's kind of what it is too. But extinctionism is like that the Hitler idea that like you got to blow up everybody, including yourself, because we've all effed up, and there's always reasons we've effed up. But I like how Tarantino basically goes into that's a given. He doesn't go into like the political layers where it's like this is why this is and this is why this is. He's all the world is already as fucked as it's going to be. It's already as good as it's going to be. And this is just how it is. And what I say goes. And so he has this commanding attitude. So then we get this authorial code, and then we're dealing with aesthetics. Now, aesthetics are how they build the story with images, the moving images, and how they build the story, whether they're long shown images or shorter time length shown images. All the arrangement of the imagery in the film is how the director gets authorial. Now, here's the thing about a script: a script and an idea and a story may change so much that, like, the authors change. But, like, they may remember in some cases where, like, they had a real cutting edge author that's not forgotten for that film. But then the script got ran around so many times that, like, it's five other guys that never saw the first guy. But when Tarantino writes a script, even with Reservoir Dogs, and he had a couple other scripts, besides Reservoir Dogs when he was cycling that around. But when he put out Reservoir Dogs as a script, that was one of the ways he broke into filmmaking, because the genius of that is he's showing the movie he's going to make in a script, and it comes out on print, and the movie is already rushed to be made, but the script is what sold it. Now, I don't think there's very many times in history that a script has sold a film. But if you release a script to a publisher, which was what he was trying to do to get his master's, and I don't know where it was, maybe USC or UCLA, both. And to get his master's, he had to do these things. And Tarantino's films have this world to them, as I've been describing, that, it's like the aesthetics come from not only the reveal of something that you've never seen before in a way you've never seen it, or that his aesthetic style comes from the artistry, not just of filmmaking itself, but of ideas that have been around for a while, redisplayed in other ways. And that's where we get recontextualization, appropriation, and all of these postmodern terms that we have, that the films all have pieces of each other in it. But that Reservoir Dogs sold the script to make the movie is how it started it all. And so Tarantino must have been a very, and we know he was very big at the Writers Guild for the longest time. And, like, he's still the biggest there, I think. And it's like, because of all the scripts he's helped with and done, because when he was starting out, he was helping with scripts, and he was working in a video store. And you have all these stories about how he's a video store guy, but he's trying to afford film school. And that's a great story. That's the story of film school. I worked in a video store, and it was a pretty good one. And I saw, like, Rio Bravo a dozen times, and that can be joked about or whatever. But the truth is that that's where the reappropriation comes from. You see, like, 100 blaxploitation films, and then you make the film about, like, scenes from various blaxploitation movies. So you just kind of repeat the scenes, but it's not to parody it. It's homage comes with pastiche, but not wholeheartedly, because pastiche can be a negative homage. Like, it could be an homage to it that, like, plays it backwards. And I don't mean negative in terms of language, like negative unity, but I mean, like, if it tells you that it's going to do something and doesn't. So let's get on the subject of this movie. Now, the thing we know about the nature of a literary script that spawns the movie is that, like, the movie is going to be different than the script, but that's probably the most ingenious way a script has ever been spared as the director and writers ever, is Reservoir Dogs, because the way he bootlegged that past them, he used school to do it, and he did get a grade for that, probably a really high grade, And so it's like, now the script sold so many copies right before the movie came out, and that's only because that pressed the movie to come out. So now you have this writer again who gets on writing credit as a director, and it's his first time out. Usually you got to start as, like, but he'd done a ton of work in other movies. That's not what I mean, but really uncredited to that point, because it was all the work. And the people that do those kind of works in the industry are the biggest ones, the interns, the PAs, because they got to carry tons of money around. They got to carry tons of coffee around. PAs have to push large objects around. They have to do everybody's job that they can to stand in when they need someone to stand in. And so that's what I never understood about, like, a bad movie job. But what I'm saying is Tarantino, I mean, he calls our bluff, and he worked for everything back in the day. And now none of us remember that Tarantino existed before Reservoir Dogs, and we'd always remember it as kind of this stage and film critic on the one hand in film school, and at the video store he actually had letters of criticism, and he had that show, or the Tarantino show, which was basically like a masterclass like this, only he's addressing the audience as him. And I'm not ever going to be like one of the, as a teacher as I am, I'm not one of those copycat guys. Like pastiche isn't copycat. That's like an homage or like a brilliant way of doing something that's in a movie and doing it again in your own style. And then you can discover the style of the filmmaker because they did that. But me personally, I'm not here to like chameleonize them. Like I like the idea of Cecil B. Demented where you're like, I'm going to get stoned as Fassbender tonight. And I'm going to get like his racially explosive Spike Lee. You know, you can say these things as a director. I'm going to get more obstructed than Lars von Trier, etc. But I don't personally like follow in every filmmaker's footsteps all the time to try and figure out a solution to things. But it isn't really a solution to things to the pro director because they're already carving together what they wanted the script to look like, except the script kind of takes second base when you go to the movie production. That's why most people put it with the audience at the most important base, because then everybody's seeing the same movie at once and they can all comment on what happens in it, because sometimes nobody knows what's going down by the time it leaves the edit bay and they forget what they were even doing. And that's because making movies is hard work. You heard about what the PAs had to do. If there's all people on the set moving it around, I mean, you can imagine that cost. You know, so like in my own view, I'm like, well, I've done filmmaking, but I'm not going to be remembered for filmmaking the way Quentin Tarantino will be. Even on, you know, this class shows that the Masterclass is treating you to a way to study one of our most revered directors and learn about his films and see what makes them work. And everyone loves Tarantino anyway, so it's not really like that peculiar that I'm defending all of his movies. You know, all the time I'm defending them since I was watching them as a teenager. That's my job as the film critic, film professor. But his job, I don't know how it works as good as he does. You know, as far as filmmaking, I'm way down here. You know, and Tarantino being one of the best, he's not like he's so busy. You know, you can't really stop in this world and get a moment with most directors because they're dealing with personal things too. And I'm just saying, I'm not riding this Tarantino wave to see if I can get popularity. I hope you guys know that this is a professional thing I'm doing to express the professionalism of Tarantino and his cast and crew. You know, it's my job to tell you that not only you're the better filmmaker, but to prove it. And I think we've proved it by saying that these are the films that defined the generation we were in. More than Kubrick, not more than Scorsese or Spielberg, but third place, man. And I'm not talking about third place of all time, but pretty fucking close. You know, these guys are the guys that reinvented the way cinema goes. And I like the way Tarantino is kind of like this hybrid of Spielberg Scorsese. He kind of has this Scorsese side where everybody's a gangster, and we're back to that nihilistic extinctionism. You know, like the Citizen Kane, the nihilistic extinctionism, not like Singing in the Rain, which has humor in it. And some of the humor leaves you aghast, and most jokes in movies get outdated, you know. But like that there's really no problems with Citizen Kane to me doesn't mean that somebody else like might freak out at at Singing in the Rain and need something like Citizen Kane to make them laugh, because sometimes tension makes people laugh. But I don't think that Citizen Kane had any much humor to it. The humor in the Tarantino movies is always happening at an intense time. So that in a Tarantino movie, like he'll be like, "Say what again?" In Pulp Fiction, Samuel L. Jackson, he pulls that gun and he's like, "Say what again?" Because this guy keeps saying, what?" In this shootout scene. Or like, what about when he shoots that guy in the head and his head explodes? Everybody's like, "Whoa!" And they're like, "You shot Marvin in the face?" I mean, there's like these lines that go through that are supposed to be like categorically like the Brian De Palma Scarface scene where they kill a few people in a car and the head explodes or whatever. So that's aesthetic though, because it's a surprise shot, and then that there's humor in it already contradicts what's supposed to be going on. So like you have that Reservoir Dogs Stuck in the Middle with You thing again, and Stuck in the Middle with You is kind of funny that song is playing because it's not really about what's happening in the movie where ears are being cut off, you know. But like one thing that I like about the Tarantino representation and pastiche and everything is that, even in the films he was credited for that weren't his own, like Natural Born Killers, there's this total overlay where you kind of see this intersection between Oliver Stone and Quentin Tarantino. And in this intersection, there's nihilistic extinctionalism is there, but that's not a requirement for film. Since they're dealing with war and male melodrama, that's really the way to go because it protects you from any other form of sentimentality that may or may not deceive you into having an attachment. And an attachment would be like a reality that's material. Although we need materials to survive, maybe we'd be better off dead so we don't have to have materials. And you could really get into it, but ultimately what it is it's meaningless, nothingness, and extinction. Because a film is meaningless, nothingness, and extinction. Meaningless that we can't trace why this shot went to why this shot to show a point of politics or psychology. Those shots went in to suspend, to persistence of vision is not necessarily political, but you can put subliminal things in it. And the subliminal things can influence the viewer even hypnotically. I know, like in classical Hollywood cinema, they used to have these little like trinkets on the set, and they'd kind of they're like totems, and you flash them at the camera, and something else happens that takes your knowledge off of that, and then the movie flows together in this way that you've been hypnotized or subliminized to expect the movie spectacle to be desirous and for bliss to maintain. It's that the conflict gets so incredibly high that when the conflict resolves, that's when you have the catharsis. The catharsis is when you feel the feeling of resolve in your system after a story. It happens in short stories, it happens in plays, novels, fiction usually, even in nonfiction. If something's so low at the bottom of its rung that it has to fight its way, and wins, there's a chance that the pleasure principle of art comes in that. And I think The Hateful Eight's one of those examples. Like the Samuel L. Jackson, like that he does survive to the end. Is like that Raging Bull survived to the end. He had to fight all those rounds, but he didn't fall over and die. Yeah, his ending came to a, nihilistic extinctionism. Again, and that's usually the viewpoint they've had since like Taxi Driver, but it goes back to Doctor Strangelove. It goes back to Citizen Kane. And to explain that concept even better, extinctionism just means if it didn't work for me and I'm dead, everybody's dead when I'm dead because I won't know anybody anymore. So in my own perception, I won't be perceiving what someone else is perceiving, you see. When I die, I'm not going to just take on the vision of some other dude on Earth because they can still prove it's not me. I'm not saying that reincarnation is not true by any means. I'm just saying I'm not going to turn into someone else that already exists. I mean, Descartes figured that out. I'm just going when I die, I'm not going to turn into someone else that, you get the point, right? So, that the protagonist of Hateful Eight is Samuel L. Jackson makes sense, and that, it's one of the only other roles besides Jackie Brown that has an African American in a lead, and Django Unchained as well. It's good for African American cinema, these films. They don't really count totally as that, but they kind of do. They do in the sense that Tarantino makes the best African American films. But they don't in the terms of that Tarantino's not just an African American filmmaker intensively. He is of that camp, though. And you can even see in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood how the African American is not demonstrated in that film, but that's the whole point. Is like we've whirled out the silent majority. They're not talking, they're not rising, they're just nowhere to be found. And that's the whole commentary that he's saying. So he's commenting on oppression in Django Unchained. He's commenting on oppression and hateful hate, but now Samuel Jackson has the drop on everybody, and now Jamie Foxx has the drop on everybody, and that's because they're given privilege as characters in a world that we've forgotten that there were heroes like that even in the Old West that weren't. I mean, I understand the laughability of Blazing Saddles, but the humor in a Tarantino is more Clint Eastwood like. It's like dry, hits you hard, and usually irony about the situation that just happened, or coincidence about the situation, you know. So that there were characters like Nat Turner was a lot like Django in Django Unchained. He was a war hero. He was a freedom fighter. He escaped slavery himself, and he got to the north by the Underground Railroad. And then he went back to the south and freed more slaves. And by the time the war was over, he was set free. But that he ends up in some, obscure knife fight or something, with one of his old, like, the guys he spied on. This is a real USA's true story, and there's other ones of that. And so now you have the stories that are more interesting being the ones filmmakers gravitate to. So this isn't total nihilism, because we're gravitating to these underdog systems of like African American cinema being reappropriated in this way that we're learning about the African American cinema of the world, because Tarantino uses that style throughout his films. But that he's also got Howard Hawks and John Ford in these movies is simply because those are the directors that all of us have in our westerns. Not me, but like they have. Well, I've done a western, but they have all those movies. The John Ford movies and the Howard Hawks movies are memorized by a lot of, because they go to film school. Directors do, and they see all the movies there are. So of course they're going to be like John Ford and Howard Hawks, because those are the types of films that are shown in film school of the classical narrative. And not just, and the classical narrative we see as the aesthetic of like a smooth operation. It goes from wide shot of everything in the expanse, and then like closer in, and then like closer in, and then like switch to characters back and forth, and then like close up, and then back up to establishing, And by the time all that happens in those few seconds of shots, which a shot is what becomes immediately into a shot becomes a scene, and a scene becomes a sequence. But the shots that are in a movie always switch when you're not paying attention to switch. That's an editing technique that makes it so it's transparent to watch a film and not really concentrate on why it's edited. Even as a viewer, I always watch to see how it's edited, because Graduate and Raging Bull and Django Unchained, and how they edited, and how it looked like the editing was a artistic thing now, because it was Godardian, and Godard draws attention to himself, but also like obscurifies and vilifies like these topics he doesn't like. Godard doesn't really go into racism as much as Tarantino. He does a little bit, but not really, because in France, they may have had the slave trade in France, but it would have been on like minuscule style compared to the slavery in America. And I think slavery is the cop-out word for most like people that are like, well, I respect that there was once slavery, so that means I'm just good to go. And I'm like, well, kind of, but I'm not saying no. I'm just saying that then there's those critics that think slavery still goes on, and we could go into that, but Django does escape slavery though in that movie. I mean, it's not like it's not implausible that there were heroes that escaped the slave apocalypse that was going on during the Civil War, and that Django gets to access spaces that are completely against him, and that he's exacting spaces that are against him. We have these layers of Django Unchained being this leveler movie. And by leveler, that makes me think that if you do one thing, it alleviates the second thing, and there you've got the conflict resolved. And in this case, he escapes from slavery with Christoph Waltz help, becomes a bounty hunter to pay him back for saving him for like a year. Has to do some nasty sniper, and then he snipers. There's a part where what he snipes is like people that are he's got to hit for the hitman, but they're bounty hunters, so they're not really hitmen. Hitmen are hired to kill. These bounty hunters are like they got to capture and kill. And that Samuel L. Jackson plays a bounty hunter in Hateful Eight means it's straight off the same story. That the narratives intercede is totally true. But that they're the John Ford and Howard Hawks difference, I'm saying that John Ford is more Django Unchained. Because it's like The Searchers. He's doing that ring cycle thing that Christoph Waltz talks about Broomhilda, which is the name of Jamie Foxx's African-American wife that's been captured at a slavery plantation. And so Broomhilda was the story of Wagner's ring cycle that was 4 acts or 4 days long, the ring cycle and the fall of the gods and all that. And that Broomhilda was in the ring cycle and that she was the one that brought down the terror of the fall of the gods is because her husband, who had the ring, died, and this is where Lord of the Rings comes from and all this. So the Wagner version of these movies, not the Wagner version, sorry, the John Ford version of Django Unchained is very interesting because that's like saying that he's searching down for his most forbidden cave, like the most forbidden threshold guardian, and that's like the dark side of himself. And so and that's going to be Leonardo DiCaprio. And that there's sort of this mirror realism between Jamie Foxx and it's like, but the mirror subverts it, and now everyone is mad at the movie, not at Tarantino or anything, but he plays the cast against their type, usually on purpose. So now Leonardo DiCaprio is a villain. We all remember him from Titanic, where he's the greatest actor we've ever seen ever on film, and he's only in like 2 movies, and we love it, or like 5 movies, We love it. But now it's gotten bigger than that for Leonardo DiCaprio. He's become one of the biggest movie stars in movie history. And then for him to take an unflattering role in one of those contradictory, I'm not trying to heroize myself, but be the antagonistic one, is risky because then the actor is playing a certain role that might scare people away from the theaters. Their normal fans may not come to the movie because they may be like, oh no, he's a cold-blooded killer in this and he says the N-word 150 times. Or Blink 182, he says the N-word 182 times, right? Urban legend. But that they risk it because later people will think back to that movie and they'll be like, I wonder if he's like that in real life. There's one thing I want to tell you. Movies are not exactly real life. They're pretty close, they're pretty close. But antagonists in movies usually aren't people that are necessarily villains in real life, Christopher Lee accepted. No, I'm kidding. But I don't think that Leonardo DiCaprio really has a slave plantation. Does anybody think he does? And if he did, he'd run it secretly, but why would he be then in a movie where the Klan loses? So if we're all coming to the movie to throw stones at everybody, are we ever convinced that the slave owners are the protagonists, the good guys? I think it's pretty clear cut that the guy who's dropping the N-word bombs is the enemy. We're just thrown off because it's Leonardo DiCaprio. And now we're like, oh, Tarantino did one of those things where he played a type of a character against himself, and he'll play characters for themselves. But you think back to Jackie Brown with Robert De Niro, where he's smoking pot, and that's kind of out of character for Robert De Niro, and that he, because he was Catholic, he couldn't smoke pot for the longest time, but he always does the realistic thing in the movie, not every time, but he does the realistic thing in the movie, and that's smoking pot. for his character isn't really realistic. It's like Robert De Niro chills down for a smoke break before he goes on a mission, you know? I don't know. Even if it's to the store, he might go to the store first and then unwind with weed. Now, he acts like a total imperialist stoner, and that's against type for De Niro because usually he's active and buoyant and he can solve things that are going on and he can take care of business. But in this Jackie Brown one, he's smoking so much pot he feels jilted by the pot. I think he even says in one of the versions of Jackie Brown that he's jilted by the pot. And she's like, "What is jilted?" You know, Bridget Fonda. So The Hateful Eight has the same kind of predicaments, though, because it's real to history that there were African American sheriffs and colonels and everything. I mean, we see the movie Glory, and we're totally convinced that there was an African American army or military expanse, like there were Inglourious Bastard military, and it's not too surprising to see that there were, because even think about it with Red Tails by George Lucas and the military itself. One thing the military will show you is that multiculturalism, even though in boot camp it gets a little mixed up with the fighting, but militarily speaking, the United States does not discriminate against African Americans or Latinos. Now, some would say that's a trap to like get them to join the military, and it isn't really. It's saying that if they do, they'll be rewarded no matter what race, class, or gender. And it's weird that the military of all places has that, because most people would say they're only recruiting this type to get them killed. And then most people would say, we don't want to be in the military, we don't want to kill nobody. But some of these guys are like, it'd be a good job if we signed up for it, and we can, really practice hard and be in it. So and plus I've had relatives in it. It's a noble job to be a vet. And that may make me sound redneck for a minute, but it's a noble job to be a vet. So that there's like this kind of war hero sense of Django Unchained and Hateful Eight. And then they both kind of lead up to each other, but they're both, interestingly, not as parallel as stories as one would expect, but Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction isn't exactly. It's a parallel more than Django and Hateful. But I think the real thing we need to focus on, though, is that Tarantino's not only playing DiCaprio against type, and Samuel Jackson against type, Jamie Foxx playing for type, which is like this badass superhero type that he always plays, where he kicks everybody's ass and takes names, And in Django Unchained, it's no different. He's a man of few words, and when he does have words, he says them and is quiet about it, and he's the one we're seeing as the protagonist. And Django Unchained is having Christopher Waltz be the antagonist in Inglourious Bastards, but in Django Unchained, he's the leader of the bounty hunters. But after they get done bounty hunting for a year, he takes Jamie Foxx, Django Unchained, to the plantation where his wife is. Then Leonardo DiCaprio starts saying so many N-words and racist things that it gets so racist that even normal racists are thinking this is offensive. And that's not to say that the movie's racist, because it's educating us to what would happen if you went into a slave plantation. And that hasn't happened really since Mandingo. And Mandingo fell apart in one of those ways because they showed the abuse of the slaves, but the abuse of the slaves was kind of done in this, funny way. It wasn't funny, but it was this cascade of despondence. Whereas when Django Unchained violence happens and Django's fighting the plantation owners, he's got the collateral that his wife has to be rescued. So now we're not mad that these guys are creating mayhem in this plantation. We're rooting for them. We want him to take the whole place down because they won't give him his wife back. And why they won't give him his wife back, even when they claim to be on the side of them. They do this kind of Return of the Jedi sneak-in thing on the plantation, right? So, where's the Searchers? The Searchers has got the character of John Wayne, who's more like Samuel L. Jackson, Hateful Eight, but that's more of a Rio Bravo type movie. And the reason is because Django Unchained travels, and Hateful Eight travels and then is steady in one place. Django Unchained steadies in one place several, but Hateful Eight is a traveler for about a third of the movie, if even that. And then it's a standard. And a standard is like one of those rope movies like Hitchcock or Lifeboat, where it's like theatrical play that plays in the building. And Reservoir Dogs, you'll notice, kind of has that same visual design. But Django Unchained is a traveler. He's been traveling all around the North and South. You know, it's the Civil War. He's finding out what's going on, you know, town to town to find out where his wife's gone. And then they travel when they're bounty hunting. They have to travel when they're going back. Now, Hateful Eight has a twist on bounty hunting because Jennifer Jason Leigh's character in Hateful Eight's the one that got taken captive at the beginning, and she's a crook, and her friends are crooks, and there's 8 of them, and they all don't like African Americans, which there's a sheriff in that range. Now, this isn't presented funny as Blazing Saddles, like I was saying before. Blazing Saddles kind of makes fun of everything, so you got to take it with a grain of salt. But Hateful Eight doesn't have the humor that way. There's humor in it, even in twisted ways, but it totally seems more realist, like as they go back to seriousness. It's like Grindhouse with Kurt Russell. He makes some people laugh at the things he's saying, but then he goes back to the seriousness of the situation. So that Jennifer Jason Leigh is the prisoner. Kurt Russell and Samuel L. Jackson are the caretakers of taking her to the death penalty. And if she's killed before that, then the government loses. It'll start a big chain reaction of bad things. And we all know in Tarantino terms that chain reaction while leading to bad things is kind of one of the ways he releases the conflict throughout the movie, and then it disasterifies at the end. But really, Tarantino does have resolve. Even in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where it drops off in media res, it still has resolve. You know, like where they go back and they tie all the loose ends of the narrative together, and especially the climactic parts, which are the rise against the threshold guardian and how far you can rise against the threshold guardian, which is personified usually as the antagonist. And when the protagonist and antagonist collide, there's your conflict. But the conflict, when who wins, and I hope will be resolved if the protagonist wins. I know that rule's been all subverted all throughout this Tarantino, where they're like protagonist, antagonist, they're all in Pulp Fiction, everybody's both. But in Hateful Eight, we know for a fact and that there is an antagonist. Not that he doesn't have antagonistic and ambiguity, which is that he's got his evil side and his good side, and that's nihilistic because no one cares if you're good or evil. You just live through life, and if you have to kill someone, that just happens anyway. You know. Not to say that Howard Hawks and John Ford weren't also nihilistic extinctionists, because they went to World War II. And World War II was a nihilistic extinctionism battle. You know, the whole world was not a battle of warfare all over the world. You know. So now we're getting these movies in a time that there's like 2000. Well, these movies come out in 2013 and 2000. Wait, see if you can find it. 2012 for Django Unchained and 2015 for The Hateful Eight. And those were times of like economic quarrel in the U.S. because we were all kind of expanding and growing in the U.S. and it was really around the time the left wing had African American multiculturalism in the White House. You know, they had it in hip hop music. There was this big move towards love and peace from the African American community. You know, I think these films are rewardable for them taking the African American heroism that's rare in the Civil War and not making it Blazing Saddles comedy. Although there is a scene where the clan attack in Django Unchained, or excuse me, Jamie Foxx. Man, it's stuffy in this room all of a sudden. Anyway, Jamie Foxx. Sorry, where was I? I didn't mean to cough on that one. I'm sorry, folks. I'm getting kind of stuffy. I'm going to open this window a little bit more. If it isn't yet, yeah, it needs opening. Whew, that was dusty. Something dusty blew in here. All right. Django Unchained. Didn't mean to ruin it for everyone. Let's get back. Oh, the Civil War. An African American hero in the Civil War is unlikely. Even in Glory, there are African American heroes in Glory. And these African American heroes don't always happen in movies, although Sidney Poitier is kind of stereotyped as always playing the good guy. Earlier in cinema. Paul Robeson, pretty much the same, although in Oscar Micheaux films, there was an African American director in the early silent era. Paul Robeson would do roles for that, and they would be subverted of his persona. Now, Hitchcock did subverted personas too, like Jimmy Stewart in Vertigo. And I think it's one of those, these are traditions of the good filmmaker, like qualities of the filmmaker tried and true, that you can get those elements into the film, And that the African Americans are getting these new elements, these new reappropriations gotten into a film, even on spaghetti Western terms. It still takes you as the hero, like the John Ford hero shot. And that's one thing Django Unchained has, is hero shots. And when he's telling that story about the ring cycle, it looks like a shot from The Searchers where they're sitting around the campfire, John Wayne and his companion. And so there's these scenes that are like extinctionist, but in the Western, it's like, but when this movie goes to blank screen, something will have resolved in the movie. And usually the resolve is that civilization will one day come and savagery will take its last stand, but that the frontier saw the end to savagery doesn't mean that they killed Native Americans. It means that's what it sounds like, and that's why I don't like how it's written, but the savagery is the human desolation to the point of these kind of civil war conflicts and everything, regardless of if they're about slavery, that we're killing each other about these very same things all throughout history. And then you start saying that makes these movies eternally important, that there's really no solution offered. Is kind of one of those lack of conflict resolutions, but those are still important to the viewer because those are like mysteries that we can all talk about, the juicy subject of the ending of the movie and whether that's actually moral to even see in a movie or hear in a movie. And Tarantino will push the bag on the morality because he was getting bagged by left-wing media back in the 90s for being the haunting nightmare disaster that Al Gore thought he was. And I'm sure Tarantino and Al Gore have like made up since, But I don't understand. But that was back in the day when like there were Christians that would get so scared of films, since The Exorcist was so popular. Christians would get so scared of films that they'd be the ones that went and like boycotted theaters. And they boycotted theaters all until the 80s with The Last Temptation of Jesus Christ, where the government finally put a notice that you can't boycott movies anymore. And I'm like, why the fuck did they allow boycotting movies in the first place? You can't boycott a movie. But then again, hear me out, Birth of a Nation, right? They boycotted Birth of a Nation. And that's actually a semi-decent event, although they shouldn't have. It's a semi-decent event in history because they're like, well, they took responsibility. And taking it out of theater was something Kubrick would do. When Clockwork Orange fucked up, he took it out of theater. So I can see that there are the filmmakers blocking the views. But if they're not the filmmakers blocking the views, who's blocking the views when the film's coming out and people are protesting it all of a sudden? Then they're blocking potential economic to the movie. Now, movies never make totally what they cost. The cost of anything to prepare and make is more expensive than even dividing it up between 1 million people and paying for it. And if you think about how things are made by things that are made, then you have an even bigger budget on your mind because you're like, this costs a lot to have, but it's the tool I need to make this happen. And so then by the time you've got it assembled, you're just basically giving it away for free anyway with artistic expression. But the photocopy machine you were using to hand out the notes and script, the photocopy machine itself is so expensive that, like, that's like half the budget of the movie. And that could fall into millions of dollars just from a script inflation. And you're thinking, well, this is ridiculous. How could a copier be costing you this much money? That's how much money copiers cost. So now you're thinking, well, I should have known that ahead of time, but I thought I already bought it. Thought you already bought it doesn't mean you had to have it well in use when you were using it for this movie, which is even more upkeep to when you first had it. But when you first had it, guarantees that there will be uptake upon it when necessary. And I'm only getting into this like utilitarian debate to kind of show you what I'm saying about like these characters aren't hopeless. There's iconography to hold on to. It's like the iconography of Samuel Jackson hanging Jennifer Jason Leigh with his new friend that was almost going to join the Hateful Eight and joined his side in this malicious showdown in the cabin that's been going on, where he's been ever since Kurt Russell got killed. And Kurt Russell was in on the stagecoach scenes, which are very beautiful scenes, snow falling everywhere on Telluride Pass, horses breathing as hard as they can, which I don't know was CGI, but I know no animal was hurt in the filmmaking process of any Hollywood film. Remember D.W. Griffith started the Humane Society in Hollywood. It was one of the first reasons Hollywood even was invented and why they were able to sign paperwork, because they kept the animals safe that were in the film. And the animals in the film were kind of movie stars, like Toto and Wizard of Oz. But Django Unchained has this plot thing where they do that Return of the Jedi thing where he pretends to be like a slave going into a plantation. Christoph Waltz is going to sell him because he's German. But that Leonardo DiCaprio falls for the whole thing and ends up getting aced. And then everybody gets aced, the plantation blows, and Samuel L. Jackson heads off. He doesn't die. He's one of the only ones from the plantation that was African American anyway. And all the African Americans pretty much live, except for a few that are taken captive. And they're acting like they're from Africa. So that they weren't dumb. They were just acting like they were from Africa. And like really, if a black person had been portrayed as dumb in any of these movies, I'd have been like, that's racist, because like blacks don't need a character in a movie that are like dumb. If you do that, then it's racist because you're saying that like the black person in the movie is dumb. And I would hate that if somebody really believed that. And really, I don't look at Hollywood that way. They'll have racist themes in their film, but in the Civil War, you can't avoid a racist theme. I mean, isn't the whole Civil War fought over racism? What is it over? Like tea in China? I don't know, dude. Like, I thought it was over racism. So aren't you going to have to portray racism in the film? Portraying racism is a lot better than directly coming out and saying in the film, we are racists. And they start coming through the screen. The Klan comes through the screen, which Birth of a Nation almost got to that point where the Klan is coming around the corner because this movie's playing. So really just saying these big epic cinema for the sake of cinema films that Tarantino's dealing with come from Griffith, John Ford, Howard Hawks, and all the ways that they used to blow all these pictures up and expressionize them or make the characters real inventive is now iconographized. Instead of stereotyping what role can be played, remember that in history all things have happened. And this isn't scripture I'm getting at. Bogus scripture I'm getting at. In history, all things have happened. That just means that, like, once something happens, it's already part of history. The beginning of this lecture made history because it got to the end. And that's the conflict resolve we have with class. We're sitting here going, we got 2 minutes left. We didn't even get to the surprise ending of Hateful Eight. No, the surprise ending's good because all these guys come in and blow everyone away in the cabin. They come in and blow everyone away in the cabin. But that's before Samuel L. Jackson got there, so that was out when he was on the ride to the place. So I said it's all in one place. But earlier, I guess this place got masqueraded by the Hateful Eight, and that was one of the reasons they had to pick him up, and that they went back to the cabin they were already at, is because part of the guy that was going to join ends up going against them for Samuel L. Jackson. So they're hanging Jennifer Jason Leigh. And it's like this freeze frame of something heroic they did. Just because they followed the rules of the American government, Apocalypse Now style. They're totally let off the hook by everyone in the audience because we're Americans. Yeah. We follow the rules. Yeah. The rules may get effed up and repugnant, like they say in Pulp Fiction. But we followed the rules, so now the people watching this dramaturgy of us are going to be like cheering. They're going to be like, I know it would have been better to hang her earlier or let her die earlier, but actually the whole film convinces me that because they hung her after everybody was dead, it had a way more effective ending. And the effective ending is because if she has to wait to die till a certain time, and that's what they're fighting for the whole time, it seems absurd. But really, we cheer in the end the way it's engineered that he doesn't kill her till they're all gone, because then it's the conflict resolved. Conflict is they didn't kill her till it was time for her to die, and they fought and killed for that, and then they got it, and it seems a terrible thing to happen, but the protagonists win. And it's on such a slim margin that you're thinking, did the protagonists win at the GIMP scenario? And these protagonists, that's the disenfranchisement, is like they won, but really barely. Like they beat these games, but down to their last little trick. And that's kind of a Godardian thing. They got through the whole narrative, but by the skin of their teeth, or so it makes it look like. Because it wasn't by the skin of their teeth, really, but in the film it is. But not because they're not the strongest and bravest, but because their predicaments were the biggest ever, even in terms of innocent bystander type things. Innocent bystanders are one type of attraction to an event that gets blown out of proportion. But in these movies, there's active, personificated heroes, even in Pulp Fiction, which has the anti-hero theme. These don't as much have, but they have kind of an anti-hero, Byronic side to them, these characters. So, my friends, in conclusion, now that class is hitting an ending and we need to get going, but we have 12, 13. This is class 12 or 13. I think it's 13. Yeah, this is 13. So 13, 14, 15, 16. I had to count on my hands for that. That's 4 more classes. There's 3 more classes from now. In one of them, I hope to bring up the topic of Terry Gilliam and Tarantino and how they mix and match. But they really don't work together. I'm not really saying that. I know they have on like Man Who Killed Don Quixote and have worked together. Everybody's worked together in Hollywood that's in there because they've all worked. Thousands of movies have gone on in each one of them's lives, and they've all been different parts in different movies for everybody else. So that's one thing to remember. But Terry Gilliam is not. They're not interchangeable with each other because Gilliam has this sort of fantasy style, and his fantasy style that hinges with, this Holy Grail, but kind of frail Holy Grail type thing in Terry Gilliam, where it's like we're chasing the ending to save it, but it's by the skin of our teeth. That's the Tarantino thing. It's by the skin of our teeth. We almost got killed several times before we won, like Die Hard style. But in Tarantino, there's sometimes the character will get totally housed and be like Michael Fassbender in Inglourious Basterds, get gunned down right away. So that's all I have to say for now. There's more on I want to compare and contrast Tarantino to another director in one of my classes, and it's probably going to be Terry Gilliam that I can compare and contrast. And I just did a little bit. But remember, for the final, if all else fails, if you compare Tarantino to another contemporary director, that means director from our common era now, like the present times, a director, and compare and contrast to Terry Gilliam. For those advanced students, you can take directors that have come before now, like Robert Aldrich, for example, of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. You can take his name and compare it to Tarantino, use a couple of films as evidence of the director's films, and compare what makes them similar and compare what makes them contrast. That helps a lot with film history, because then if they're a lot alike, people can kind of figure out how they rely on their pieces fitting modernly, even dragging attention to itself, jump cuts, Godard style, or revealing that you're making a movie even without showing the film apparatus. Although once upon a time in Hollywood, the film apparatus is all but seen. Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. We'll see you next time at Masterclass.